You know the legend. A creature 7 feet tall walking upright through North American forests, leaving footprints the size of dinner plates in the soft mud beside lakes that nobody photographs at night. For half a century, Bigfoot has been the punchline of campfire jokes and the subject of grainy 1967 film clips that Hollywood has never been able to fully discredit and never been able to prove. Believers and skeptics have argued past each other for so long that the question itself has gone stale. Does it exist? Does it not? The debate is so worn out, it has become its own kind of folklore. But while the cameras and the footprint casts and the thermal imaging studies have circled each other in a stalemate for 50 years, something else has been sitting quietly in a series of magnetic tape reels stored in a private collection in northern Nevada. A series of audio recordings made over 4 nights in October 1972 in the wilderness of the Central Sierra Nevada. Recordings that have been authenticated, copied, played, dismissed, ridiculed. And finally, in the last few years, fed into the kind of pattern recognition systems that did not exist when the tapes were made. And what came out of those recordings is not a wolf. It is not a bear. It is not a hoax or a coyote or the wind through the pines. It is, by every measurable standard the analysis applied, a language. And once you understand what the translation actually says, you are going to wish very seriously that the tapes had stayed where they were left. The story begins on the night of October 21, 1972, at a hunting camp at roughly 7,000 feet of elevation in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. In a stretch of pine forest so remote that the nearest paved road was a 2-day ride out by horseback. The camp had been set up by a small party of men, led by an outdoorsman named Ron Moorhead, who is still alive today and still tells the same story he told 53 years ago, more or less unchanged. With Moorhead that autumn was a journalist named Alan Berry, who had come along to write what he assumed would be a colorful piece about backcountry hunting. Berry would never write that article. What he wrote instead, in the years that followed, was a book that nobody in the academic establishment ever took seriously, and that quietly went out of print sometime in the 1980s. What happened that first night happened the way these stories almost always happen. The fire had burned down. The horses, picketed at the edge of the clearing, started behaving wrong. Their ears went flat. Their eyes rolled white. One of them, a big bay gelding that had never spooked at anything in 3 hunting seasons, began pulling against its lead rope hard enough to snap a branch off a young pine. And then, from somewhere on the dark slope above the camp, came a sound that none of the men had heard before and none of them could explain. Moorhead later described it as something between a howl and a chant. Berry, in his notes, wrote that it sounded organized. Both men agreed on one detail. There were at least 2 voices. Maybe 3. They were calling to each other across the valley. And whatever was making the sounds was moving downhill toward the camp. Moorhead, who had been carrying a Sony reel-to-reel tape recorder for the entirely separate purpose of dictating hunting notes, did the only thing a man with a working tape recorder does in a moment like that. He pressed record. He left the machine running for 42 minutes. The tape ran out. He flipped the reel. He kept recording. Across 4 nights in October 1972 and a follow-up trip the following autumn, Moorhead and Berry captured what would eventually become known as the Sierra Sounds, roughly 90 minutes of audio that, even to a casual listener with no investment in the cryptozoology debate, does not sound like any animal North America is supposed to contain. But here is where the story stops being a campfire anecdote and starts becoming something the academic establishment has spent 50 years trying to forget about. In 1978, the tapes came into the hands of a man named R. Scott Nelson. Nelson was not a cryptid hunter. He was not a believer. He was a former United States Navy cryptologic linguist with 26 years of experience analyzing intercepted foreign language audio for military intelligence. He had spent his career listening to recordings of voices speaking in languages most people will never hear, looking for patterns that revealed meaning, structure, intent. He had been trained to distinguish between noise and speech, between gibberish and code, between an animal call and a human conversation. And he had done it well enough that the Navy had let him do it for a quarter of a century. When a colleague handed him a copy of the Sierra reel and asked, half-jokingly, whether he could tell what was on it, Nelson took the tape home for the weekend and put it through the same analytical procedure he had used on actual foreign language intercepts. What he found, by his own account, kept him awake for the next 3 nights. Picture Nelson in his small home study in Reno, Nevada, late autumn 1978. The room smells of cold coffee and the chemical tang of magnetic tape that has been played too many times. A spool of the Sierra recording is loaded onto a TEAC reel-to-reel, the same model the Navy used for field intercepts. Nelson is wearing the heavy cushioned headphones the Navy issued him in 1962, the ones his wife says have permanently flattened the hair above his ears. He has a yellow legal pad open on the desk, the kind he used to fill with phonetic transcriptions of Russian submarine chatter and Eastern Bloc radio traffic. The first time through the tape, he simply listens. The second time, he begins writing. By the 4th pass, he has filled 6 pages with phonetic notation, the standard symbols cryptolinguists use to represent every distinct sound a human mouth can produce. His handwriting, which is normally military precise, is becoming faster, less controlled. He keeps having to start over because his hand is shaking. Around 3 in the morning on the second night, his wife comes downstairs to ask him to come to bed. He does not answer her. He is staring at the legal pad. She would tell a friend, years later, that her husband's face that night was the color of wet paper. He looked like a man who had just been told a piece of news he did not want to be true. What Nelson had found, and what he would spend the next 4 decades trying to convince his former colleagues to take seriously, was not random animal vocalization. The Sierra recordings contained sounds organized in a way that animal calls are never organized. There were repeated phonetic units that returned in different combinations. There was prosodic structure, the rising and falling pitch contours that linguists associate with grammatical phrasing in human languages. There were turn-taking patterns between the 2 main voices, the kind of overlap and pause sequencing that occurs in every human conversation in every language ever recorded. And there were, by Nelson's count, 91 distinct recurring phonetic units across the 90 minutes of usable audio. To put that number in perspective, the entire English language uses approximately 44. The Sierra sounds were not gibberish. By every technical standard the United States Navy had taught Nelson to apply, what he was listening to was a language. And the implication of that single fact, if you allowed yourself to follow it where it led, was something the academic world was not prepared to confront. Nelson took his findings to a small handful of trusted colleagues at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. The reaction, according to a memo Nelson kept in his personal files, was uniformly the same. 3 of the 4 reviewers agreed that the audio was structurally consistent with language. None of the 4 were willing to put their names on a public statement saying so. The case went cold. The cryptozoology community continued to argue about footprint casts and grainy films. The academic establishment continued to pretend the audio did not exist. And the tapes themselves sat in a private archive in northern Nevada for 4 more decades. Copied and shared among enthusiasts, but never seriously reanalyzed by anyone with the technical capacity to push the analysis further than Nelson had been able. To push it in 1981 with a TEAC reel-to-reel and a yellow legal pad. Before we get to what changed, you need to understand why the question of what the recording says is one that very specific institutions in the United States have spent 50 years working to ensure was never asked. In 1977, 5 years after the Moorhead recordings were made, the Federal Bureau of Investigation received a sample of physical evidence from a researcher in Oregon, claiming to be hair from an unknown primate. The FBI did the analysis. The results were classified for nearly 40 years. When the file was finally declassified in 2019, what came out was, on the surface, a deflationary finding. The Bureau identified the hair as belonging to deer. But the same declassified file revealed something the original press coverage had never mentioned. The FBI had received not 1 but 4 separate hair and tissue submissions from different parts of the Pacific Northwest in the late 1970s, and only one of them was ever publicly addressed. The other 3 were logged, analyzed, and quietly filed under a classification protocol the Bureau used at the time for evidence in ongoing investigations. What those investigations were, and why physical samples submitted by private citizens reporting an unknown North American mammal were treated under a protocol normally reserved for active federal cases, has never been explained on the record. The Smithsonian Institution, around the same period, was approached 3 separate times by independent researchers requesting access to the institution's reference audio archive for the purpose of comparing the Sierra sounds to known North American mammalian vocalizations. The standard response, repeated in 3 letters preserved in a cryptozoology archive at Idaho State University, was that the Smithsonian's audio reference materials were not available for use in research. The institution considered to fall outside the scope of established zoology. The implication was clear. The institution was not interested in performing the comparison, not because the comparison was impossible, but because the comparison was, in the institution's own framing, professionally inappropriate. There is a quiet phrase that academic gatekeepers use to describe research they do not want to be seen engaging with. They call it career-ending interest. The Sierra sounds, by every account from the small handful of mainstream linguists who have looked at them in private, fall squarely into that category. This is the texture of the suppression, and it is important to understand what kind of suppression it actually is. Nobody is suggesting a coordinated government cover-up of the kind that conspiracy films enjoy. The reality is more boring and more effective. There is no central authority issuing orders. There is only a long, slow social agreement among the institutions that decide what counts as a serious question. That this particular question is not one they wish to be associated with. And so the tape sat. And so Nelson's analysis sat. And so the question of what was actually being said on those 4 nights in October 1972 sat for almost half a century, until the technology to answer it caught up with the question, and someone with no career left to lose decided to ask it anyway. Picture a researcher named Dr. Elena Vance. Let's call her that, because the work she did is real and the analysis she produced has been circulated in private among a small group of linguists. But she has asked, for reasons that will become clear, that her real name not be attached to the result. Vance is a computational linguist with a doctorate from a major American research university and 15 years of experience working on under-resourced and endangered languages. She specializes in the recovery of linguistic structure from corrupted, fragmentary, or otherwise non-standard audio sources. Indigenous language preservation work. Wartime intercept material. Field recordings of speakers who died before transcription was possible. Vance is exactly the kind of analyst the Sierra Sounds would have benefited from in 1978, and she is exactly the kind of analyst that, until recently, would never have touched a cryptozoology audio file in public. She did not touch it in public. She did the work over a 6-month period in 2023, in her own time, on her own equipment. And what she produced was a 340-page technical report that has never been formally published. The report exists. Copies of it have been read. The findings have been discussed at one closed conference and presented in summary form to 2 academic linguistic societies, both of whom declined to host a public version of the talk. What follows is what Vance found, summarized for an audience that does not have a doctorate in computational phonology. The first finding confirmed Nelson's 1978 analysis with terrifying precision. Vance's neural model, working from the cleanest available transfer of the original Moorhead reels, identified 93 discrete, recurring phonetic units across the corpus. Nelson, working by ear with a yellow legal pad, had counted 91. The 2 analyses, separated by 45 years and by every conceivable technical advance, agreed within a margin of 2 units. That kind of cross-validation is, in the world of computational linguistics, almost unheard of for an unknown language sample. It is not the kind of result you get from animal calls. It is not the kind of result you get from a hoax. It is the kind of result you get when 2 different analysts, working with completely different tools, are looking at the same underlying linguistic structure. The second finding was where Vance's analysis went somewhere Nelson's never could. By feeding the phonetic inventory of the Sierra Sounds into a comparative database of phoneme distributions across the world's documented languages. The model produced a ranked list of human language families whose phonetic profiles were closest to the Sierra material. The top match was not English. It was not any European language. It was not Spanish, not Russian, not Mandarin, not Arabic. The top 3 matches, by a significant statistical margin, were 3 indigenous language families of Western North America: Karuk, Hupa, and Wintun. All 3 are languages spoken historically by peoples whose ancestral territories overlap with, or border, the Central Sierra Nevada Mountains, where the 1972 recordings were made. All 3 contain phonemic features, specifically a class of laryngealized consonants and a particular pattern of vowel-pitch interaction that are extraordinarily rare in the world's languages and that are abundantly present in the Sierra Sounds. There is no scenario in which a hoaxer in 1972, working with a tape recorder in a remote hunting camp in California, could have produced 90 minutes of audio whose phonetic profile happens to match a small cluster of indigenous languages most Americans have never heard of, and that the hoaxer himself, on every available account, could not speak. The match is not perfect, The Sierra sounds are not Karuk. They are not Hupa. They are not Wintun. But they share with those languages a substrate, a foundational set of phonetic features that no random animal noise and no random human invention could produce by accident. And this is where the disturbing part begins. When Vance's model was finally pushed to attempt actual semantic mapping, the identification of probable meaning units within the recurring phonetic vocabulary, 3 things came out of the analysis that her report describes with the careful, neutral language of a researcher who is afraid of what she is writing down. The first thing the model identified was self-reference. Across the 90 minutes of usable audio, one specific 3-phoneme cluster appears 47 times, almost always at the beginning of an extended vocalization sequence. In every human language ever documented, that pattern of placement and frequency is consistent with a single grammatical function, a self-naming particle. In English, the equivalent is the word I. In Karuk, it is na. In the Sierra recording, it is a sequence that Vance's report transcribes phonetically and that, when run against the comparative phonemic database, returns a single closest match in the documented oral tradition of the Hupa people. The match is to a word that the Hupa, in stories collected by ethnographers in the 1890s and never widely circulated outside academic publications, used to describe a category of beings they called the Watchers on the Slope. The creatures making the sounds in 1972 appear to have been telling Moorhead and Barry their own name. And the name they were using was a name that the indigenous peoples of the surrounding territory had been using for them for at least 3 centuries before Moorhead pressed record. The second thing the model identified was that the 2 main voices on the recording were not directing their vocalizations at the human camp. They were directing them at each other. The prosodic patterns and turn-taking analysis show 2 speakers in conversation. And the directionality of the audio, extracted by Vance's team using a technique developed for analyzing classified surveillance recordings, places the 2 speakers approximately 200 meters apart on opposite sides of the camp. Calling across it, they were not threatening the men. They were not warning them off. They were communicating with each other about the human party in the middle. The third thing the model identified, and this is the finding that Vance's report flags with the most cautious framing, is that the topic of the conversation, as inferred from the recurring vocabulary clusters and their relation to the Hupa lexical substrate, appears to have been concerned with a specific question. The same phoneme sequence, repeated by both speakers in alternating exchange, returns a closest match to a Hupa interrogative construction whose ethnographic gloss is, depending on context, either what is the price or what do they owe. The 2 creatures on either side of the camp, on the night of October 21, 1972, were having a conversation in a language that has linguistic kinship with the indigenous languages of the region they were standing in, and the conversation, as far as the analysis can determine, was about what the men by the fire were going to be asked to pay. We do not know what the price was. We do not know whether it was ever collected. Moorhead and Barry came down off the mountain alive that October, and Barry died of unrelated causes in 2012. And Moorhead is still telling the same story he told in 1972. But there is one detail in the original recordings that Vance's report flags, in a footnote, as the single piece of evidence she found most difficult to write down. In the final 12 minutes of the master tape, the 2 voices on either side of the camp stop calling across the valley. There is a long silence. And then a third voice begins, much closer, somewhere just outside the firelight at the edge of the camp itself. The third voice does not engage in conversation with the other two. It speaks alone, in a low sustained sequence of phonetic units that the model identifies, with high confidence, as a recurring formal pattern in human languages, used for one specific purpose. Vance's report names the pattern in technical terminology. In plain English, the closest equivalent in any human language is the construction used for making a promise. Whatever was standing at the edge of Moorhead's camp in the last hour of recording on the night of October 21, 1972, was making a promise. To whom and about what and whether it has been kept, the analysis cannot answer. But this is what the AI finally pulled out of 53-year-old magnetic tape that the Smithsonian would not look at, and that the Bureau classified. The parallel hair samples on, and that the academic establishment spent a full half-century pretending, was the wind through the pines. It is not the wind through the pines. It is a language. The creatures who speak it have been telling indigenous peoples their own name for centuries, and we wrote that down in 19th century ethnographies and put it in archives nobody reads. They have been speaking to each other across our campfires in a tongue that shares its bones with the languages of the people who lived in those mountains before us. They have been making promises in the dark, just past the firelight while we slept on the other side of it. And we, with all our recordings and all our microphones and all our refusal to listen, have spent 50 years calling it noise. The translation isn't disturbing because it tells us something terrifying. It is